Welcome, and close your eyes, if you haven't already. Tonight, we begin in a quiet room with tatami mats beneath our feet and the soft rattle of shoshi screens shifting in the breeze. The hour is late, and a paper lantern glows just enough to turn silk into gold. This is where the geisha lives. Not just the woman, but the idea, the hush between a note and a breath, the quiet curve of painted lips. Not smiling, but waiting. This isn't a story of scandal or seduction. Not exactly. It's something older, quieter, and far more precise. This is the story of the geisha, and it begins with a misunderstanding. For much of the world outside Japan, the word geisha has been stretched and bruised by centuries of misinterpretation. But in Japanese, it's very simple. Gei means art. Sho means person. A geisha is, quite literally, an art person. Someone trained not to serve, not to seduce, but to perform. Their currency isn't flesh. It's grace, wit, elegance. The way they pour, sake, or hold a fan, or raise a single eyebrow can carry more power than a kiss. But to understand how such women came to be, both revered and misunderstood, we have to go back to the beginning, to a Japan before neon, before films and photographs, a Japan of ritual and shadows, in the heart of the Edo period, when samurai ruled with rigid formality and towns thrummed with merchants, poets, and entertainers. Pleasure was not just an indulgence, it was a system. Entire districts were devoted to it. The most famous was Yoshiwara in Edo, now Tokyo. Walled off, regulated, and illuminated by candlelight, it was a place of carefully curated fantasy. It's here that the early ancestors of the geisha emerged. Not women, at first, but men. Yes, the first geisha were male performers, playing drums, singing bawdy songs, and entertaining at feasts. Their purpose was laughter, distraction. But as women began to master the same arts and added their own refinement, the role shifted, slowly, subtly, until the geisha became what she is now, a symbol not of comedy, but of composure. A geisha is not born, she is shaped, molded by rules so intricate they might as well be whispered in dreams. From a young age, a girl who wished to become a geisha, or who was chosen, would enter an okiya, a geisha house. There she became a mako, or apprentice, and from that moment forward, nearly every hour of her day was devoted to learning, not just how to sing or dance, but how to sit, how to laugh without showing teeth, how to walk without seeming to touch the ground. Even sleep became part of the training. Mako slept with their necks propped on wooden pillows to protect their elaborate hairdos, which could not be redone every day. A lost curl could be a lesson in failure. There was no casualness in this world. The misconception of geisha as prostitutes likely comes from the proximity of geisha districts to brothels, and the blurred lines between roles in foreign eyes. But the geisha's job was not to undress, but to enchant. A patron might dine beside a geisha for years, spend fortunes on her company, and never once touch her hand. Her value was not in being taken. It was in being unattainable, a mirror held up to a better self. To dine with a geisha was to brush against perfection and know you were being outperformed. Her tools were quiet ones, a shamisen plucked with subtlety, a fan opened with flair, a seasonal haiku recited just as the first snow fell outside. Every gesture had meaning, every glance a hidden script. Even her kimono was a language, long sleeves in youth, shorter ones in age, the pattern of her obi, the depth of its knot, the way she folded her sleeves when pouring tea, each a code, readable only to those fluent in beauty. And there was sadness too, buried beneath the powder, because to live as a geisha meant giving up certain things, a personal life, a family of one's own, even a name. Many geisha took on new names when they entered the profession, like slipping into a second skin, one that was smoother, shinier, but no less real for being worn. The okia where a geisha lived was both home and employer, run by a female proprietor called the okasan, the mother, who managed finances, arranged appointments, and ensured the strict standards of the house were kept. For a young mako, the okasan could be both guardian and warden, affectionate in some cases, cold in others, but always in control. Debt was common. Training, kimono, instruments, all were expensive, and most young women began their careers already owing their house a small fortune. Some would never pay it off. Still, many chose this life for the prestige, for the artistry, for the chance to become something larger than themselves, a moving poem, a living performance. And for the rare few who rose to the highest ranks, the rewards were not only symbolic. Wealth, influence, and independence could be theirs. In a world that often limited women to roles of wife or servant, the geisha was something else entirely, a profession of femininity, not in service of men, but of art itself. As the candle burns low in this first quiet room, let us hold that thought gently, that behind the layers of silken paint is not just a woman, but a tradition, a legacy, one of stillness in a rushing world. In the next room, or rather, the next chapter, we'll slip behind the curtain of ritual and rules, the etiquette of presence, the rules of beauty. But for now, rest in the hush. Let the lantern flicker low. It often surprises people to learn that the first geisha were not women at all. Before the powder, before the silk, before the careful placement of fans and a slow glide across tatami floors, there was a man with a drum, the takomochi, literally the drum bearer. A figure that did not shimmer in candlelight or seduce with mystery, but instead made people laugh. In the earliest days of the Edo period, when entertainment was still forming itself into categories, the takomochi sat beside feudal lords and samurai, whispering advice, performing skits, telling stories that walked the line between humor and history. He was companion and counselor, a jester in kimono, a learned man who could soothe tempers or stir laughter with a flick of his fan. He was not a background figure. He was the show. There was elegance in his timing, just as there was danger in his wit. To serve a lord meant understanding politics and poetry in equal measure. One poorly timed joke could cost him his life. One perfectly timed tale could save another's. And so, the takomochi studied not just performance, but people. He watched, listened, learned to read the flicker in a nobleman's eye, the hesitation in a general's breath. With no stage and no applause, he shaped atmosphere like a brush paints fog. Presence was his art. But the world changed, as it always does. The power of feudal lords waned. The cities bloomed, and entertainment moved from castles to pleasure quarters. The shift was subtle at first. More women entered the space. They sang, they danced, they poured tea with a softness that made men lean forward without knowing why. The female geisha did not replace the not immediately. For a time, they coexisted, the men telling stories, the women singing beside them, a duet of grace and humor. But the audience changed. The demand shifted. Slowly, people wanted less laughter and more beauty, less commentary and more presence, and the women, with their subtle smiles and layers of color, offered something that Takemochi could not. By the 1700s, female geisha began to rise. They worked alongside the oiran, the high-ranking courtesans known for their elaborate dress, towering hairstyles, and mastery of both the bedroom and the salon. The oiran were celebrities, trained in art and conversation, but also in seduction. They were hard to reach, expensive to engage, and in their shadow, geisha played a quieter role. They assisted, entertained guests while the oiran prepared, softened the edges of waiting. But guests noticed. The geisha's role may have been smaller, but it shimmered with possibility. She was witty. She was clever. She did not sell herself, and in that withholding, she created a new kind of allure. The oiran, for all their fame, were bound to the licensed quarters, the yukaku, gated, regulated, and fixed in place. But the geisha could move. She could leave the district, attend private parties, cross bridges and boundaries that the courtesans could not. And so her freedom grew. Not in body, but in presence. Clients began to ask for geisha, not just courtesans. The lines began to blur, and the Takemochi, watching from the sidelines, began to disappear. Not entirely. Some remained. A few even trained female geisha in music and poetry. But the profession shifted, and with it, the gendered center. The geisha became woman, and the art changed with her. By the 1800s, the transformation was complete. Geisha were now almost exclusively female. They no longer played support to courtesans. They had become a class of their own. And unlike the oiran, their role was explicitly non-sexual. That is not to say eroticism was absent, but it was coded, controlled. A geisha might suggest romance in a poem, hint at longing with a look, but her purpose was never seduction. She was not to be touched, and this distance, paradoxically, made her more desirable. In a world where bodies could be bought, the geisha offered something rarer. Conversation, presence, poise. She was there, and yet not yours. Still, the association with the sex trade lingered. Foreign visitors, unfamiliar with the layers of Japanese social customs, often conflated geisha with courtesans. And to be fair, the proximity was confusing. Both wore elaborate kimono, both entertained in tea, both understood the art of presence. But the distinction mattered deeply within Japan. A courtesan could sell her body, a geisha could not. It was a line drawn in powder and silk, but defended fiercely. To accuse a geisha of being a prostitute was an insult. To imply that her art was a pretext for access was to miss the entire point. The shift from male entertainer to female artist was not simply a matter of who wore the kimono. It was a transformation in purpose. The taikomochi served feudal lords with humor and counsel. The early female geisha added elegance and artistry. But the modern geisha, the figure who emerged in the late Edo and Meiji periods, became something far more refined, a living symbol of taste, of seasonal awareness, of how to speak when nothing needed to be said. She was trained in dance, in music, in calligraphy, in subtle games, played with words and fans and knowing glances. She did not tell you what she thought. She made you feel it. This evolution also reflected Japan's shifting culture. As the country modernized and Western influence crept into daily life, the geisha stood as a link to older rhythms, to a time when beauty was measured in restraint, when flirtation happened in syllables, not skin. The profession persisted not in defiance of modernity, but beside it. A separate stream flowing quietly through the loud river of change. And those who entered the world of the geisha understood that they were becoming part of something layered and precious. Not just a performance, but a lineage. Even today, there are a few taikomochi left. Very few. Mostly older men who keep the tradition alive through storytelling and occasional performances. They are reminders of the profession's origins. Ghosts of a time when men held the fan and women watched, but the world turned and the fan passed hands. The geisha, as we now know her, painted, poised, perfect, is the result of centuries of change, and at each stage she was shaped by the needs of her time. In this history, there is no single moment of invention, no one figure who stood up and said, "Now we are geisha." Instead, there was a slow layering, a drifting of practices, a folding in of customs like the layers of a kimono, each one adding depth, meaning, weight. The result is not just a woman in makeup, but an institution, one that has endured war, modernity, misconception, and near extinction, and she continues still, walking through the lantern-lit alleys of Kyoto, her footsteps nearly silent. The next time you see a geisha, in photograph, in painting, in imagination, remember the man with the drum, the taikomochi, who once told stories beside feudal lords. Remember the courtesans with their jeweled combs and impossible hair, who taught the early geisha how to sit and speak and serve without giving. Remember the slow shift from humor to elegance, from male to female, from support to centerpiece, and see her not as a relic, but as a living echo, a quiet reply to a question few still know how to ask. She is not there for you. She is there for the art. And in honoring that, we see not only her history, but our own longing for something beautiful, controlled, and almost lost. In the next section, we will slip further inside the quiet world of the geisha-s training. The long path from apprentice to artist, the rituals of refinement, and the small rituals that shaped a lifetime. But for now, let this history settle like dust on old lacquer. Quiet, careful, and almost holy. To become a geisha is not to simply declare it. One does not wake up, paint their face white, and step onto the tatami floor. It is a process, long and layered, shaped by centuries of repetition and reverence. The woman you see today gliding silently through Kyoto's Jian district is not just performing. She is the product of thousands of hours behind closed doors. Countless dawns spent bowing, cleaning, listening, watching. She is made, and she is paid for. Historically, the path began young. Not with a brushstroke of makeup or the tying of an obi, but with a decision made by someone else, often a parent, more often a guardian, who arranged for a girl to enter an okiya, a geisha house, a place that was not quite a home and not quite a school, a place suspended between family and business. Girls might be as young as 6 or 7. By modern standards, it might seem impossible, but in earlier centuries, childhood ended early, and training began as soon as hands could fold towels and feet could walk without sound. The okiya was where everything began. From the outside, it looked unassuming, just another house among many, with its wooden lattice, its paper doors, its line of potted plants bowed gently toward the sun. But inside, the okiya was a world unto itself. It was overseen by the okasan, the mother, who was not the girl's real mother, but something more complicated. She was the house's owner, its manager, its matron. She held the debts, the appointments, the rules, and she decided who advanced and who stayed behind. A girl entering the okiya first became a shikomi. She was not yet an artist. She was not even a performer. She was a servant. Her days were filled with chores. Sweeping, preparing meals, carrying laundry, tending to the needs of senior, geisha, and mako. But this was not punishment. It was preparation. While scrubbing the wooden floors, she learned posture. While watching older girls arrange flowers or tie their sashes, she memorized gestures. The shikomi absorbed the rules, not through instruction, but through immersion, like a cloth steeped in tea. In the past, the shikomi stage could last for years. Today, it is usually about a year. Long enough to test her patience, her willingness to stay. Because many do not. The hours are long, the rules are strict, and the glamour, which draws so many from the outside, is nowhere to be seen. No makeup, no applause, only discipline. A girl who succeeded as a shikomi was not just obedient. She was observant, curious. She knew when to speak and when to be invisible. She passed the final test, not with a performance, but with a word. The okasan would decide when she was ready to be introduced to an older geisha, who would become her mentor. Her onasan, or older sister. With that pairing, the girl became a mako, the apprentice, the image many people associate with geisha, the brightly colored kimono, the elaborate hair, the wide sleeves, and heavy wooden sandals. That is the uniform of a maiko, not a full geisha. And it is not just aesthetic. It is symbolic. The heavy fabrics remind her to move slowly. The tall okobo sandals train her posture. The bright colors mark her as young, still learning, and most of all, the presence of her onesan by her side keeps her grounded. The relationship between mako and onesan is one of profound intimacy and structure. The older geisha teaches not only technique, but timing. When to bow, when to laugh, when to wait an extra heartbeat before responding. The Mako imitates at first. Mimicry is not seen as unoriginal, but as essential. Originality comes only after the fundamentals are buried deep in the bones. A flick of the wrist, a turn of the neck, these are studied as seriously as any academic subject. The Onesan introduces her Mako to clients, brings her to events, and protects her reputation, and in return, the Mako watches, learns, listens. Mako study the traditional arts every day. These include the shamisen, a three-stringed instrument plucked with a square pleck, classical Japanese dance, where every movement tells a story, tea ceremony, a world of precision where even the folding of the napkin is an act of beauty, singing, calligraphy, flower arrangement, and seasonal etiquette. The training is formal and constant. Some classes begin before sunrise. Others continue after midnight. The body is not trained for performance. It becomes the performance. There is no separation between life and art. The hair alone is a curriculum. Mako do not wear wigs. Their elaborate hairstyles are formed from their own hair, shaped into precise forms using wax and combs, and the assistance of skilled hairdressers. The most famous style, the Shinobu, involves loops and side buns, secured with ornamental pins called kanzashi. Each pin has meaning. Some are seasonal, some denote rank. The hairstyle is redone only once a week, which means Mako must sleep on wooden supports to preserve it. It is uncomfortable. It is unnatural, but it is necessary. Kimonos are chosen with equal care. A Mako's kimono is long-sleeved, heavy with embroidery, and always seasonal. Cherry blossoms for spring, maple leaves for autumn, snowflakes for winter. The collar is red and embroidered, signaling youth. The obi, the sash tied around her waist, is long and often drapes down to her ankles, tied in a style known as. It is wide and cumbersome. It affects how she walks, which is exactly the point. Every movement must be slow, deliberate. The kimono trains the body in poise. All of this, the classes, the instruments, the kimonos, the hair, the etiquette, costs money, enormous amounts, and the Mako does not pay for it directly. The Okya covers the expenses. In return, the girl is bonded to the house. Her future earnings belong not to her, but to the Okya, until her debt is repaid. This is not exploitation, at least not always. It is patronage, an investment, but it is also binding. Some Mako take years to repay their debts, others never fully do. The line between family and business is as fine as the edge of a fan. The day a Mako becomes a full geisha is called her erike. Turning of the collar, it marks the shift from apprentice to artist. Her red collar is replaced by a plain white one. Her kimono becomes simpler. Her hairstyle changes, and she may begin to wear a wig. The colors fade, but the precision increases. She is no longer expected to sparkle. She is expected to master silence. The geisha's presence is subtler, her movements smaller, her mystery deeper. She no longer imitates, she performs. But that is later. In this section, we remain with the still learning, still folding towels and practicing shamisen until her fingers ache, still bowing until her back remembers the curve by muscle memory, still sleeping without crushing her hair, still walking in heavy sandals that never allow her to forget the ground. Her life is not glamorous. It is sculpted, not in marble, but in repetition. One bow, one note, one sip of tea. There are joys, friendships with other Mako, the thrill of a perfect performance, the quiet pride in mastering a dance once stumbled through. And there are sorrows, homesickness, pressure, the weight of expectation, but for those who endure, the transformation is real. The shikome becomes the Mako becomes the geisha, and the geisha becomes part of something older than memory, a thread in a tapestry that stretches back centuries. As we leave her now, sitting beneath a paper, lantern adjusting her sleeves, listening for her onoson's call, let us remember that every gesture we see in public, every dance or song or subtle turn of the wrist began here, in this house, in this silence, in the long, slow path of becoming. To watch a geisha perform is to watch stillness in motion. Her body moves, but never hurried. Her hands glide, her voice hums, her steps echo not with weight but with memory. And beneath each gesture lies an ocean of practice. To become a geisha is to disappear into the rhythm of tradition, and to perform as one is to make centuries feel like the moment between two breaths. Nothing is rushed, nothing is improvised, and yet it appears effortless. This is not a trick. This is mastery. The geisha is not merely a performer. She is a living conduit of art, a carrier of forms that predate her and will outlast her. When she dances, she is not just telling a story. She is inhabiting one. Each movement is deliberate. Each fold of the kimono, each blink of an eye, each tilt of the chin has been practiced until it no longer feels like performance. It feels like breathing, but unlike the loud applause of a stage, the world of the geisha is quieter. Smaller rooms, dimmer lights, conversations that tiptoe around desire and wit. Her art is not for spectacle. It is for atmosphere. The most iconic of her instruments is the shamisen, a three-stringed lute with a sharp, almost percussive sound. It is played with a large plectrum, the bocce, which strikes the strings in a motion that is equal parts rhythm and restraint. In the hands of a geisha, the shamisen becomes not just music, but mood. It can laugh, weep, or sigh. She learns it by repetition, song after song, stroke after stroke. In some, Okia girls begin shamisen training before they even learn to write. Notes come before syllables. Music becomes a language that needs no translation. Alongside the shamisen is the dance. Nihon Bayu, the classical dance of Japan, is not a performance of athleticism. It is the control of space. Arms form circles like waves. Feet move in silence. The fan becomes a bird, then a falling petal, then a gentle refusal. Unlike Western dance, which often tells stories through volume and motion, the geisha's dance is quiet. It is suggestion, A geisha may perform a piece that spans minutes and never move more than a few steps. But in that space, entire seasons can change. She is also trained in voice. Singing in the geisha tradition is not belting. The melodies are sparse, often melancholic, with long vowels that stretch across silence like bridges. Songs recall love lost, cherry blossoms fallen, rivers crossed, and moments past. The voice is soft, not weak, and it carries more feeling than its volume would suggest. Some songs are centuries old, their origins forgotten, but the geisha learns them as if they were her own diary entries, whispered across time. In some regions, the geisha may also play the fu, a kind of Japanese bamboo flute. Its sound is breathy, almost ghost-like. It bends in and out of silence. Not all geisha are trained in it, but those who find that it teaches control. A single note can take seconds to form, and in that delay, the room listens. The flute becomes a breath held, and then a release. But the geisha's training does not stop with instruments or dance. She is also a master of atmosphere, of ambience. Her presence turns an ordinary evening into something memorable, and that requires more than art. It requires understanding people, their moods, their rhythms, their insecurities and vanities. The geisha is not just a performer. She is a hostess, but not in the modern sense. She does not serve food, she serves presence. The geisha is trained in conversation, not just in speaking, but in listening. She knows when to guide the talk and when to let it wander, when to flatter and when to tease. Her knowledge must be wide enough to engage a scholar and soft enough to soothe a merchant. She must know poetry, politics, fashion, weather, and gossip. But more than facts, she must know. She must sense the hesitation in a guest's voice and respond not with correction, but with curiosity. She is also skilled in games. The kinds of party games played over sake, with laughter that hides skill. She may challenge a guest to compare a fun-fun, a hand game that requires rhythm and nerve. Or she may host a poetry contest, folding paper cranes as the verses are read. These games are not childish. They are coded rituals, designed to disarm and entertain. A guest who loses is teased gently. A guest who wins is praised without flattery. The balance is delicate. Beyond these interactive arts, the geisha is also trained in disciplines that are more solitary. Calligraphy, for instance, the art of brush and ink. She learns to write not only her name but entire poems in flowing characters. The stroke order matters. The balance of black and white matters. The space between words matters. A geisha's handwriting is an extension of her poise. A letter from her is not just read, it is kept. She learns ikebana, the art of flower arrangement. But this is not about beauty. It is about asymmetry, about negative space. A single branch placed just so, to echo a moment in nature that most would overlook. The geisha does not create the bouquet. She reveals the stillness hiding inside it. And then there is the tea ceremony, perhaps the most meditative of her arts. It is not about drinking tea. It is about preparing it, with care, with silence, with intention. The sound of the ladle, the scent of the tatami, the warmth of the cup, each is part of the experience. The geisha does not rush. She does not distract. She becomes the rhythm of the tea itself. And in doing so, she brings the guest into stillness, into presence. Her daily routine is structured around these arts. Morning begins with grooming. Hair, skin, kimono, each must be flawless. Then come the lessons. Shamisen dance, voice, language, posture. Each class is exacting. The teacher does not praise, she corrects. And the geisha does not complain. She practices. Then, in the afternoon, she may rest briefly, or she may meet with younger apprentices, guiding them as she was once guided. Evening brings the engagements, the tea houses, the parties, the performances. She arrives not as herself, but as presence made visible. There is fatigue. The kimono is heavy. The hairpins ache, the sandals cut. But the guest never sees that. The guest sees only grace. That is the art. To carry effort without showing it, to make centuries of tradition seem like instinct. It is often said that a geisha performs for the room, not the self. She does not demand attention. She invites it. Her performance is not a spotlight. It is a candlelight. Soft, warm, flickering. It does not blind, it reveals. Some say her art is dying. That there are fewer geisha now, that the world moves too fast. And perhaps that is true, but the art remains. In pockets of Kyoto, in the hush of an old tea house, in the echo of a shamisen string, in the silence between steps. She is not trained to impress. She is trained to be, and that being, composed, elegant, restrained, is the performance. In a world of noise, she is quiet mastery. The sun has not yet broken through the mist when she rises, not because someone commands her to, but because her rhythm is already set. The day begins before the world expects anything of her, and even the act of waking is not rushed. A geisha moves from sleep the way others move from stage to bow. She begins with stillness, then with breath, then with presence, always presence, because in her life nothing is ever done absent-mindedly. Her room is simple. Tatami mats, sliding screens, a mirror with just enough light to reflect intention. There is no clutter. Even her personal things are arranged with care. Hairpins laid out in soft rows. A folded kimono waiting for its turn. The hush of the okiya is its own kind of meditation. Outside, the city begins to stir. But in here, there is only rhythm. The quiet preparation of a body that will become art by evening. Before breakfast, there are tasks. The younger ones tend to cleaning. They sweep the corridors, prepare tea, fold linens, brush the steps clean of petals or dust. These acts are not servitude. They are part of learning. A geisha does not simply arrive. She is steeped into the fabric of the house. The older ones may assist with dressing or offer subtle guidance to a mako, still finding her fingers in a shamisen song. The okasan oversees all, with an eye that misses nothing. She is not harsh, not warm, but always attentive. The okia breathes in quiet order. Breakfast is simple. Rice, pickles, mise. A moment to nourish, a moment to listen. Conversation is soft, nothing loud. Laughter comes, but is never explosive. Even here, at home, in worn Toby socks and undone hair, the grace remains. It is not put on, it is practiced until permanent. After the meal, the day truly begins. Training resumes. Dance classes with instructors who've corrected the same mistake for 30 years. Shamisen practice with fingertips calloused and raw. Voice lessons that repeat the same note until it vanishes into air. Tea ceremony rehearsals with bowls held like newborn birds. There is repetition. There is boredom. There is pain. But there is also transformation. The body forgets itself and remembers form. The geisha does not perform. She becomes. The practice is not just daily. It is devotional. In between lessons, there may be fittings. The kimono is not a costume. It is a sculpted second skin, chosen according to season, event, and guest. Each color has mood. Each pattern tells time. A crane for winter, plum blossoms for early spring. The obi must be tied just so. The sleeves hang at the precise angle to sway when she turns. Her collar, high and white, shows only the nape of her neck. That most poetic of exposed skin in her world. Dressing is slow, not because it is complicated, but because haste would be vulgar. The ritual matters. By late afternoon, preparations for the evening begin in earnest. Hair is set, if it is not a wig. Makeup is applied in stages. First the wax base, then the iconic white face paint, then the red around the eyes and lips, applied in careful rhythm. This is not a mask. This is a canvas. The transformation is not about hiding, but about becoming legible. A geisha enters the room not as a person, but as a presence. As a dream the guest can remember without touching. Her evening schedule is managed, not by whim, but by the quiet machinery of the geisha world. At the center of this machine is the oka. She does not just run the house. She runs the bookings, and these bookings pass through an entity both quaint and powerful. The official registry office for geisha and their engagements. Think of it as a blend of an agency, a union, and a watchful grandmother. No geisha is directly booked. Requests are made to the okasan, who then confirms through the kenban times, places, durations. Everything is documented, not for control, but for decorum. The structure is invisible from the outside, but it is absolute within. The most common booking is the ozashiki, a banquet often held at a tea house or ryote, a traditional Japanese restaurant that only the well-connected or well-financed can access. These are not rowdy parties. They are rituals of elegance. A geisha enters with a bow. She sits not at the head of the room, but near the shadows. She does not dominate. She creates mood. Her duties vary. Sometimes she performs music. Sometimes she dances. Sometimes she simply hosts, guiding the flow of sake, teasing the shy guest, soothing the loud one. She is not a waitress. She is atmosphere made flesh. The The payment for these services once came in the form of the senkadai, the incense stick fee, a poetic system where the passage of time was marked not by clock, but by the burning of incense, one stick, 1 unit of service, or the gyokudai, the jewel fee, a more ornamental term for a less ornamental amount. In Kyoto, the term ohana, or flower fee, is still sometimes used, though today many payments are calculated by the hour. The poetry remains in name only, but in function, the structure is intact. The client pays not just for time, but for mood, memory, mystery. The guest never sees the money. The geisha never asks. The kenban handles all. The okasan receives the fee, and the geisha is later informed. Her earnings go first to the house. Debts are subtracted. Expenses tallied. Only a portion reaches her hands. This is not injustice. It is the system, and the geisha understands it. She knows that her presence is made possible by the house, by the mother, by the invisible threads that allow her to glide effortlessly into a room already softened by her reputation. A single evening might involve one party or several. The geisha may move from room to room, house to house, her feet barely making sound on the old wood. She bows, she dances, she listens, she performs songs older than the language they were written in. She pours drinks without ever watching the cup. Her gestures are coded. She knows how close to sit, how long to hold a gaze, how far to let a compliment go before deflecting it with a laugh. It is a kind of seduction, but not of the body, of attention. She does not want you to want her. She wants you to remember her. By midnight, the parties are winding down. The laughter turns softer. The guests begin to slur, and the geisha bows again, gathering her sleeves, exiting with the same grace she entered. Her sandals tap gently down the alleyways. The lanterns flicker. Kyoto is quieter now. She returns to the okia, not with exhaustion, but with quiet. She removes the layers, wipes the paint from her face, stores the hairpins. The night does not feel like a shift. It feels like a passing. She may write in a notebook. She may sit quietly. She may simply lie down, her body still holding the posture of performance. The day is over, but the cycle is ready to begin again. The routine is not dull. It is sacred, and she is shaped by it. Each geisha carries herself with a set of unspoken rules. Do not raise your voice. Do not hurry your walk. Do not gossip. Do not correct a guest in public. Do not forget the seasons. Do not arrive smelling of modern perfume. Do not slouch, even when no one is watching. These are not posted on a wall. They are breathed in through years of observation. And even in private, most geisha never unlearn them. To live this life is to exist in a curated frame. Every movement is intentional. Every hour accounted for. Every event observed. There is little privacy. Even moments of rest are filtered through expectation. But for those who embrace it, the life is not imprisonment. It is immersion, to be always a part of something older, something quieter, something poised. The world outside is louder now. The guests are different. The parties are shorter, but the geisha remains. not because she resists change, but because she carries continuity. Her days do not belong to her entirely, but they are hers in practice, in poise, in presence. When she bows to leave, you do not just watch her go. You feel the room change, as if something sacred just passed you by. You may not know her name, but you will remember the way she looked at the falling cherry blossom without speaking, and you will remember the silence she left behind. Some things look similar in the dark. A flick of silk, a painted face, a whispered laugh behind a fan. But not everything that glimmers under lamplight is the same. In the floating world of old Japan, there was a difference, quiet but precise, between the geisha and the courtesan. A line not drawn in ink, but in time, in duty, and in silence. And though the world has blurred that line since, it once mattered deeply to those who lived behind it. The courtesan came first. In the pleasure quarters of Edo and Kyoto, she was spectacle, wealth, and fantasy made visible. Her name was Oiran, and she walked above the crowd, quite literally, on raised platform sandals that lifted her high above the street. Her kimono trailed behind her in endless folds. Her hair stood like a lacquered sculpture, stacked with ornaments. Her presence was not soft. It was dramatic, intentional, meant to arrest the eye and hold it in place. She was both performer and object, and her art was seduction. Oiran were not common. They belonged to licensed districts like Yoshiwara in Edo, where rules were as strict as they were surreal. A man could not simply visit an oyer. He had to be invited, approved, sometimes even auditioned. She had the right to refuse. Her status was high, her clientele wealthy, her schedule tight, and though sex was part of the arrangement, it was not immediate. Nights with an oiran were ceremonial, layered with poetry, sake, flattery, and sometimes months of gifting before anything physical was promised. She was not just a body for hire, she was a fantasy for sale. Then, somewhere on the edges of that glittering world, something quieter began to stir. At first, they were assistants. Girls who played the shamisen between courtesan appointments, who poured drinks, told jokes, filled silences. They weren't there to seduce. They were there to soften the room. They were called geisha, a word that meant art person, and slowly they began to draw attention not with bodies, but with atmosphere. The first geisha were men. Takemochi, drum carriers, jesters who told stories, wrote witty poems, hosted tea, but by the late 1700s, women had taken over the term. Their appeal was subtle. They didn't wear towering wigs or platform shoes. Their kimonos were elegant but muted. Their collars showed just a trace of neck. They walked with precision, not drama. Where the oiran dazzled, the geisha lingered, and where the courtesan performed for the eye, the geisha performed for the air in the room. This was not a rivalry. It was a shift. As cities changed and tastes softened, more clients came not for spectacle, but for conversation, for song, for the feeling of intimacy without transaction, and the geisha, in her quiet strength, rose into that space, not to replace the courtesan, but to offer something different, something measured, something that stayed just out of reach. Still, the line between the two was fragile. From a distance, They both moved through the same night. They both wore paint and silk. They both entertained men who didn't always understand the difference. And even today, the words are blurred. In the West, the confusion has hardened into myth. A belief that geisha were simply refined sex workers, or that all women in the floating world belonged to the same trade. But in the cities of old Japan, the difference mattered. It was more than etiquette. It was identity. A courtesan's life was bounded by contract. She belonged to a brothel or house. Her training was expensive, her clothing more so, and her body part of the ledger. She was allowed luxuries. She was admired, but she was also watched. When her youth faded, her position slipped. Many retired early. Some vanished. Her fame was intense, but brief, like a blossom opened too wide too soon. A geisha, by contrast, did not sell her body. She sold her presence. Her training was just as rigorous, her lifestyle just as demanding, but her earnings came from performances, from hosting, from reputation. If a geisha chose to take a lover, it was her choice, not an obligation. She was not forbidden from romance, but it could not be public. A patron might become close, gifts might be exchanged, but it was not a transaction in the same sense. And that difference, so small and so huge, was fiercely protected by the geisha community. This is why the Okasan mattered. The mother of the geisha house, the keeper of appointments and reputation. She did not just train the girls. She defended the border. If a client made assumptions or crossed boundaries, the Okasan stepped in. If a Marco, the apprentice, was offered something improper, the house intervened. The geisha world could be strict, even harsh, but its rules were meant to shield its members from the conflation that hovered just outside its doors. The visual differences were also clear. If you knew what to look for, a courtesan's obi, the wide sash around the waist, was tied in front. It allowed for ease, for show, for undressing. A geishas was tied in the back, complicated, deliberate, impossible to remove without assistance. A courtesan's hair was a castle of pins and combs, each with symbolic meaning. A geishas was more reserved, often styled by hand, less about invitation, more about restraint, and perhaps most tellingly, the courtesan walked in a parade. Her entrance was a public event. The geisha slipped in quietly, arriving just before the first drink was poured. Even the geography mattered. Licensed quarters were cities within cities, their own laws, hours, customs. Inside Yoshiwara or Shimabara, the courtesan reigned, but outside, in the tea-houses and riaute of the regular streets, the geisha worked. She did not need to be hidden behind gates or introduced by guards. Her power came not from exclusivity, but from this elegance extended to how geisha managed their reputations. They were not to be photographed casually, not to be chased on the street, not to be in Kyoto, even today. Signs asked tourists not to touch or follow geisha, not out of fear, but out of respect, because the boundary, once so clear, has faded in modern memory, and though courtesans are no longer part of the living tradition, Their shadow still lingers in the way people perceive painted women walking through Gion. But to the geisha, the difference still matters. She may share the same streets. She may wear similar silks, but she belongs to a lineage that chose artistry over transaction. Her dance is not invitation. Her song is not prelude. She is there to create something ephemeral, something you cannot buy, only witness. It's easy, now, to conflate them. The geisha with her whispering steps, and a courtesan with her elaborate procession, two women painted and poised in twilight settings, both framed by silks and secrets. But their stories diverged sharply in the eyes of the law, in the minds of their patrons, and in the quiet pulse of the cities that held them. Theirs were paths that crossed only at the edges, and even those edges were carefully maintained with a kind of elegant tension. The Tokugawa shogunate, which ruled Japan from the early 17th to the mid-19th century, enforced a rigid moral structure. It was a world organized not only by class, but by behavior, where every gesture had meaning and every role had rules. The licensed pleasure districts were a compromise. Forbidden fruit, made manageable by walls and ledgers. Within these quarters, the oiran operated under regulation. Brothels were taxed, courtesans registered, and everything recorded in dense books kept by bureaucrats who pretended not to read the details too closely. Geisha, by contrast, remained outside this framework. Their houses were registered not as brothels, but as establishments of the arts. Their names appeared in performance ledgers, not client rosters. This wasn't just a clerical technicality, it was a line drawn in ink and guarded with pride. A geisha who violated this boundary, who offered sexual services in the way of a courtesan, risked more than legal trouble. She risked being struck from the registry, blacklisted, removed from the official lists kept by the ken, and without those lists, a geisha could not book parties, perform in tea houses, or participate in the seasonal gatherings that gave her status. To be erased from the registry was not just to lose work, it was to lose identity. This is why the system policed itself. The okazan of the okia did not tolerate ambiguity. If a client made assumptions, he was corrected. If a geisha crossed a line, she was corrected more harshly. Reputation moved faster than fact, and in the tightly wound circles of the geisha community, whispers carried weight. Still, the misunderstanding lingered. Foreigners arriving in Japan in the 19th and early 20th centuries were often dazzled what they saw, but unsure of what it meant. To them, a painted woman pouring sake must belong to the world of sex. They imported their own notions of courtesanship, overlaid them onto the geisha image, and carried them home in postcards and stories. Some travelers wrote breathlessly about their experiences with geisha, not understanding that what they described had more in common with the pleasure quarters than the geisha quarters. Others simply romanticized, turning the geisha into a kind of living doll, passive, submissive, a fantasy with no internal life. Even Japanese literature played with the confusion. In popular novels and plays, characters blurred together. A geisha might fall in love. A courtesan might recite poetry. The line between performance and passion was often teased, played for drama, and eventually, in some stories, crossed. Art imitated life. but also warped it, and the public, ever hungry for beauty, absorbed the blend. But within the communities themselves, the distinction never softened. Geisha trained not for seduction, but for presence. Their education was in restraint. They learned when to speak, when to hold silence, when to let the moment pass unfilled. A courtesan, by contrast, was expected to fulfill fantasy. Her time was paid for in the expectation of satisfaction. A geisha's time was paid for in the hope of remembering the moment long after it had passed. Both roles required enormous discipline. Both demanded intelligence, humor, and resilience. But they moved in different spheres. The Oran's world was closed, ceremonial, and temporary. A courtesan might be the star of her quarter for a few years, but her fame faded with her youth. The geisha's arc could be longer. Her skills refined over decades. Some geisha performed well into their 60s. Their movements slower, their voices softer, but their presence still magnetic. This longevity came from the separation. By refusing the courtesan's path, the geisha preserved something rarer, a sense of mystery, a sense of mastery, and yet the myth remained. In the West, especially during the 20th century, geisha were often portrayed as symbols of exotic submission. Films and novels painted them in soft focus, wrapped them in melancholy, and confused their role with that of a mistress. The real women behind the art were often lost in translation. This confusion reached its peak during and after the Second World War. As foreign soldiers flooded Japan, many were introduced to women labeled as geisha who were, in fact, part of an entirely different system. Some were some were sex workers. Some were women simply trying to survive by adopting the image that sold. The line between geisha and courtesan had been blurred not by the traditions themselves, but by the market. The image was profitable, and so it spread. But the true geisha community never accepted this distortion. In Kyoto, in Kanazawa, in Tokyo, the Hanamaki, the flower towns, maintained their codes. They taught new apprentices with the same care. They observed the same rituals. The dance steps remained. The shamisen was tuned. The tea ceremonies still began with the same slow breath. And the boundary was still there. Not a wall, but a veil. Delicate, intentional, and fiercely protected. Even today, that veil is misunderstood. Tourists visit Kyoto, hoping to glimpse a geisha and often confuse her with a mako, her apprentice. Others, higher performers dressed in geisha style, clothing for photographs, unaware that true geisha do not pose on command. Some ask inappropriate questions. Some attempt to touch, but the geisha continues to walk. Not faster, not slower, just past them. She does not explain herself. She does not correct them. She allows the moment to dissolve. Her role is not to educate the passerby. Her role is to create atmosphere for those who know how to receive it. This is what distinguishes her, not what she does, but what she refuses to do. The geisha offers presence without promise. She does not sell access. She sells experience. And that difference, though invisible, is everything. In contrast, the world of the courtesan, though extinct, is remembered with a kind of shimmering nostalgia. Her outfits are preserved in museums, her stories retold in kabuki plays. Her legend haunts the pages of woodblock prints and erotic scrolls. She was a figure of spectacle, trapped in ritualized seduction. She lived brightly, burned quickly, and vanished. The geisha remained, not because she hid, but because she adapted. As Japan modernized, the oran faded, the brothels closed, but the geisha adjusted. She learned to speak to businessmen. She studied new songs. She learned to charm politicians. She became, in a quiet way, a cultural ambassador, not of sexuality, but of subtlety. This is not to say one path was better, only that they were different. The courtesan offered fantasy. The geisha offered present. The courtesan was owned. The geisha was booked. The courtesan's value declined with age. The geishas deepened. Both moved in silks. Both danced. Both laughed at men's jokes. But only one disappeared when the spotlight dimmed. And so, the next time you see an old photograph, a woman in white paint, hair pinned, sleeves flowing, ask yourself not what she offered, but what she represented. Was she fantasy or presence? Was she invitation or atmosphere? The difference is small, but in her world it mattered more than anything. In a society where most women were expected to marry young, bear children, and disappear quietly into domestic roles, the geisha walked a different path. Her steps were slow, deliberate, patterned across streets lined with tea houses rather than hearths, while wives pressed kimono collars and boiled rice for family altars. Geisha were negotiating fees, booking appointments, and preparing for the evening's performance. Not just entertainers, not just artists, but businesswomen, navigating a world built almost entirely by and for men, and somehow managing to own part of it anyway. The karikai, or the flower and willow world, was strange even in its own time. On the surface, it looked delicate. Blossoms and brocade, lanterns and laughter. But underneath that beauty was something harder, something organized, structured, durable. This world was sustained not by men, but by women. Women who trained other women. Women who ran the okia, the geisha houses. Women who managed the ledgers, approved the bookings, arranged the payments. It was one of the only corners of traditional Japanese society where men weren't in charge. The okasan, literally mother of an okia, wasn't just a maternal figure. She was a manager, an investor, a disciplinarian. She oversaw every aspect of a geisha's life. She paid for training, for costumes, for the elaborate hairstyles that had to be set by professionals in early morning hours. And in return, the geisha owed her, not in spirit, in yen. The arrangement was contractual. Debts were tallied and tracked. The okia functioned more like a guild than a household. Its success depended on the talent and earnings of the women it raised. And so the geisha became, often from a very young age, part of an intricate economic system. A girl might enter the okia as a shikomi, performing domestic tasks and learning the rules of the house. Eventually, if she proved diligent, she would become a maiko, an apprentice geisha, and begin her real training. Dance, music, conversation, etiquette, all of it cost money. All of it was billed to her account. By the time she debuted as a full-fledged geisha, she was likely tens of thousands of yen in debt, not to a faceless institution, but to the okasan who had raised her. But here's the quiet twist. Unlike many women of her time, the geisha had the ability to repay that debt herself. She could earn, she could save. She could become, if she was successful, independent. Some geisha eventually bought their own okia. Others invested in property. A few retired with enough savings to live well, without needing marriage for security. In a society where most women had no financial agency at all, the geisha's world offered something radical: autonomy. That autonomy wasn't always easy. It came with pressure, with scrutiny, with sacrifice. Many geisha chose not to marry, not because they couldn't, but because marriage meant leaving the profession. To marry was to walk away from the karikai, to let go of the community that had raised you and the art that defined you. Some geisha had lovers, discreetly. Others had patrons, men who offered financial support without formal ties. But the decision to remain unmarried, to prioritize career over companionship, was both practical and symbolic. It said, I choose this life, I choose this work, I choose myself, and in that choice lay a kind of quiet rebellion. While the rest of society whispered about obedience and modesty, the geisha built lives around skill, presence, and financial negotiation. Their world may have been cloaked in ritual and tradition, but underneath the layers of silk was something sharper, a sense of self, honed by years of practice, a refusal to be owned. This is not to say geisha were always in control. The system could be exploitative. Some girls were pressured into the life by family circumstances. Others found their debts impossible to repay. Not every okia was ethical. Not every okasan was kind. But even with these flaws, the geisha world remained unique, because it was one of the few places where a woman could rise by her own skill, where her value wasn't defined by a husband's name or a father's connections, but by her ability to hold a room in silence. And it is that silence that defines so much of geisha independence. Not loud declarations, not banners or marches, just presence, just patience. The ability to remain, to endure, to make space in a society that didn't always know what to do with women who didn't need saving. Independence was never handed to geisha. It was stitched, step by step, into the hem of each kimono. It was poured into the tea they served, practiced in the steps of each dance, and echoed in the slight bow before a guest who might misinterpret everything. They were not shouting for liberation. They were living it in the quiet currency of grace, control, and financial stability. When you stood in a hanamachi, the traditional geisha district, it was easy to be distracted by the aesthetics. Lanterns, laughter, wood smoke curling from the eaves. But behind the charm was an economy that thrived on precision. Geisha were not paid in tips or tokens. They were booked through the kenban, the official registry office. Every engagement was recorded. Every fee was documented. Even today, Kyoto's geisha are booked through this elegant and bureaucratic system, which ensures that pricing remains fixed and transparent, protecting both the geisha and the client. In the past, one did not simply show up to hire a geisha. A referral was required. Relationships were built over time. A newcomer might attend a party where geisha performed, but personal interaction had to be earned. This structure discouraged frivolity. It created boundaries. And for geisha, it created reliability. She knew when and where she would perform. She knew what she would be paid. She knew that her time had value. Value. That was the quiet revolution. While most women's time was considered an extension of duty to husband, to children, to household, the geisha's time was her commodity. Her calendar was her currency. She could accept or refuse engagements. She could raise her fee. She could retire early or continue into old age. Her work aged with her. A senior geisha might no longer dance. But her presence, her conversation, her reputation, these became the performance. In a culture that revered elders but often made them invisible, geisha found a way to remain visible. They also found ways to lead. Many courtesans had once been geisha themselves. Having paid off their debts and saved wisely, they used their earnings to buy or inherit an okia. They trained the next generation, managed bookings, oversaw every detail, from meals to makeup to the scheduling of lessons. These women were not just former performers, they were CEOs in kimono. Their decisions shaped the survival of entire districts. Even in modern times, the karikai remains largely female-run. This is not a relic. It's a feature. Young geisha today enter the same world of contracts and mentorship, of training and independence. While the number of practicing geisha has declined, those who remain carry on the tradition not as antiques, but as entrepreneurs. They invest in branding. Some run cultural workshops, others tours internationally. A few even manage social media accounts, carefully balancing mystery with modernity. And yet, despite their autonomy, they are often misunderstood, especially in the West, where the geisha is still trapped in a narrative not of her making. People assume she is submissive, that her grace is a form of compliance. But geisha would argue that their presence is not submission, it is control. To hold attention without revealing everything. To enchant without promising. That is a power rarely recognized, but deeply effective. Some modern geisha speak openly about this paradox. They describe themselves as feminists, but not the loud kind. They are liberated, but not rebellious. Their freedom lies in discipline, in choice, in economic independence. They don't need to prove anything. They simply live it. It is worth remembering that the karikai was never part of the traditional household system. Geisha were not wives. They were not daughters-in-law. They were not subject to the same family hierarchy that dictated a woman's worth through marriage and childbirth. In this floating world of tea houses and performances, a different code applied. And while that code was strict, full of etiquette, hierarchy, and responsibility, it was built by women. For women. This separation from family life meant that geisha carved out a distinct social space. They could be present in elite gatherings, hosting samurai or industrialists or foreign dignitaries. They could influence mood, sway decisions, relay information. They were not politicians, but they understood power. They worked near it, if not within it. And they carried that understanding with quiet confidence. Over time, this independence left a mark. While the rest of Japanese society saw slow shifts in gender roles, the geisha had already built a model of female autonomy. It was not always praised. Some dismissed it as performance. Others misunderstood it as survival. But to the women who lived it, it was something more enduring. A life crafted through skill, not marriage. A world maintained by women, not men. And so the geisha continued. Through wars, through economic shifts, through tourism booms and busts. Some left the profession to marry. Others opened businesses. A few remained until old age, becoming legends not just in their hanamachi, but in the cultural memory of Japan itself. Their independence was never absolute. They faced judgment, assumptions, restrictions. But they also created something remarkable, a system in which women could live by their own expertise, could train each other, could support each other, could be both artist and accountant, performer and property owner, geisha and leader. In the quiet streets of Kyoto's Gion district, there is a sound that never quite disappears. It is the soft shuffle of lacquered sandals on stone, the whisper of a silk kimono against the breeze, a rustle of sleeves as a woman passes by, her neck powdered in the traditional W shape that has come to symbolize something delicate and enduring. The geisha has not vanished. She has simply become quieter, harder to find. But if you wait in the right place, long enough, you may see her. Not a museum piece, not a ghost. A modern woman, still very much alive, and still walking in the footsteps of centuries. Today, geisha are fewer in number, but not in spirit. The karikai, the flower and willow world, has grown smaller and more intimate. Many okia have closed, others have merged or evolved, but some remain, holding tightly to their legacy, continuing to train young women in dance, music, etiquette, and performance. Apprentices still live under the roof of the okia. The courtesan still arranges lessons, appointments, and kimono fittings, and when the lanterns are lit in the tea houses, geisha still arrive. A modern apprentice geisha, a maiko, begins much as her predecessors did. She enters the okia as a shikomi, performing chores and watching quietly. She learns how to fold the futon, how to prepare tea, how to speak Kyoto-ben, the refined dialect of her district. After months, she receives permission to debut. Her name is chosen. Her hairstyle changes. Her collar turns red and her sandals grow higher. The debut is not just a personal transformation. It is a public one. She now belongs, visibly and officially, to the karikai, but this world, though steeped in tradition, now sits beside another one, faster, louder, more digitized. The maiko may wake to birdsong and temple bells, but the streets outside her okia are filled with tourists, taxi horns, and cell phone flashes. Some visitors mistake her for a cosplay model. Others ask for selfies without knowing her name. The old ways do not always translate. Still, she bows, she smiles, and she continues. The art forms taught in the geisha world remain as intricate as ever. The dances are still practiced daily, slowly and with repetition. The shamisen is still plucked, its mournful notes echoing down quiet halls. Calligraphy, poetry, the tea ceremony, none have been abandoned. But new challenges have crept in. Fewer young women choose this path. The years of training, the physical demands, the limited public understanding, all contribute to a shrinking pool of recruits. Many maiko today are in their late teens or early 20s when they begin. Some finish their university degrees first. Others join after working in different professions. The calling is still powerful, but the context has changed. For those who stay, the rewards remain unique. A geisha in the modern age may live independently, especially after completing her apprenticeship. She pays her own bills. She selects her engagements. She might even manage her own business, offering cultural workshops or running a tea house. Some geisha have become local celebrities, appearing in documentaries or being featured in international magazines. Their photos are carefully curated, their names respected. They are no longer anonymous, though they remain elusive. Despite modernization, much remains traditional. The booking system through the Kenban registry still controls appointments and prevents undercutting. Prices are standardized. Schedules are reviewed. The formality protects the geisha from exploitation. It ensures that her services, her performance, conversation, hosting, are treated with seriousness and respect. Clients today may be corporate executives, visiting dignitaries, or private groups seeking a rare experience. The setting may include tatami mats and candlelight, or it may unfold inside a renovated ryote with air conditioning and Western-style chairs. But the essence remains the same. It is an exchange of presence. a curated moment of calm. Outside Japan, the concept of geisha still carries a fog of misunderstanding. Some assume the geisha no longer exist. Others believe they were simply elegant courtesans, a refined form of sex worker. Even today, when a geisha appears in film or media, she is often portrayed as trapped, tragic, or passive. The truth is quieter, but more surprising. She is working, performing, choosing. She is a woman in a specific career, a guardian of intangible. Herit is a host with knowledge that takes a decade to learn and a lifetime to perfect. What surprises many is how the geisha communities, though secretive and insular, have embraced certain modern tools. Some okiya maintain websites. Others offer guided cultural sessions to select visitors. There are social media accounts carefully monitored by managers. They show glimpses, never the full story. A fan being painted, a foot stepping into a zori sandal, a close-up of a hair ornament gleaming under light. It is not exhibition. It is preservation, gently filtered through the digital lens. And preservation matters now more than ever. UNESCO and various Japanese cultural agencies have recognized aspects of geisha art, the music, the dance, the hosting as part of Japan's intangible cultural heritage. Grants have been offered, documentaries made, books written. The aim is not to revive a dying practice, but to respect a living one. One that survives not because of nostalgia, but because of the commitment of the women inside it. These women often describe their daily life as quiet but full. Lessons in the morning, practice in the afternoon, engagements in the evening. A geisha's wardrobe alone requires skill to manage. The layers of kimono, the tying of the obi, the seasonal changes in fabric and color, nothing is accidental. Even the way a geisha walks, slow, deliberate, straight-backed, is practiced. It is both aesthetic and symbolic. She is not in a hurry, she does not stumble. Her time moves differently. For all their elegance, geisha are not exempt from hardship. The pandemic brought severe disruptions. Bookings vanished. Tourists disappeared. Some geisha retired early. Others took part-time jobs to support their okiya. But many returned when it was safe. They reopened the paper doors, lit the lanterns, called their musicians. The world had changed, but they had remained. Today, the number of geisha in Japan is estimated to be fewer than 1,000, with the majority concentrated in Kyoto, Tokyo, and Kanazawa. The number is small, but its influence is outsized. Tourists travel halfway round the world for a glimpse. Scholars dedicate careers to the study of their art. And still, for the geisha herself, the focus is narrow. One performance, one client, one evening at a time, in the twilight of old Japan, where electric lights shimmer across cobblestone streets and vending machines hum beside ancient wooden walls. The geisha walks, not always in full regalia, not always between appointments. Sometimes she's simply returning home from lessons. Sometimes she carries groceries in the crook of one arm, but the way she moves, upright and measured, reveals who she is. The world around her spins faster now, with tourists rushing past and traffic pulsing in the distance. But the geisha does not rush. She never has. That, perhaps more than anything, is what sets her apart. In this modern era, much has changed. The okiya, once filled with the rustling steps of apprentices, now hosts fewer girls. Many geisha today live independently, especially after completing their training. They lease small apartments nearby, furnished with modern appliances, and sometimes even own cars. But at twilight, they still return to the tea house, still pass through paper doors, still bow to the okasan, who helped raise them through the ranks. The connection to the okiya remains strong, not just out of duty, but out of shared identity. Most bookings are still managed through the Kenban Registry Office. It serves as a quiet anchor between tradition and professionalism, ensuring all engagements follow protocol. In this way, the geisha world has preserved what many others have lost: structure, fairness, consistency. While other performance arts have been shaped by fame or social media, the geisha world resists public overexposure. A geisha is not booked for spectacle. She is hired for atmosphere, the delicate ambience of a bygone world. Kept alive not by nostalgia, but by memory. Her skills remain impressive. A modern geisha must still master the arts. She continues to dance, to sing, to play shamisen, and to conduct the tea ceremony with precision. Yet her audience has shifted. She may now perform for international guests, embassy officials, or university groups, and sometimes she teaches. Workshops and demonstrations allow geisha to introduce their art in safe, curated spaces. A small circle of guests gathered to watch a fan open, a tea bowl turn, a step glide across the tatami. The performance is the same. Only the framing has changed. Tourism has brought both opportunity and risk. In Kyoto especially, Meiko and geisha have become living icons. Tourists follow them through alleyways, snapping photos without permission. This has prompted some districts to enforce fines for harassment. Still, the attention brings interest, and interest helps sustain the tradition. Some geisha have learned to navigate this paradox. They remain visible, but not accessible, known, but still unknown. The mystique must be preserved. A geisha, seen too often, too easily, loses her aura. Technology has also crept in. While the geisha herself may not own a smartphone, or at least not admit to using one, the okia might maintain a website, a calendar of public performances, a digital photo gallery. Some houses now accept inquiries by email, even if bookings still go through the traditional channels. It's a quiet adaptation, done not with fanfare, but with grace. After all, tradition isn't about refusing change. It's about choosing how to carry it, and tradition must now be carried with care. The number of active geisha has declined over the decades. In the early 20th century, there were tens of thousands across Japan. Today, fewer than 1,000 remain. But this has not spelled the end. Rather, it has led to concentration, to careful, intentional preservation. Young women who enter the profession today do so with clarity. They know the path is long, the hours demanding, the pay modest, at least in the early years. But they also know the value. They are inheriting something rare, a living art passed from hand to hand, gesture to gesture. These women come from varied backgrounds. Some are drawn to the aesthetics, others to the discipline. A few come from families with ties to the Hanamachi. Many are motivated by the idea of continuity, of stepping into a lineage that defies the pace of the modern world. They learn to bow just so, to serve sake without a spill, to smile with the eyes but not the mouth. These details, imperceptible to most, matter deeply within the world of geisha. They are not frivolous. They are the code. And through that code, the geisha finds her place, not just as a performer, but as a curator of a certain atmosphere of elegance, quiet, and poise. In a society that has grown louder, she brings silence. In a world of speed, she brings slowness. Guests do not attend a geisha party to be overwhelmed. They come to be soothed, to be immersed in a setting where conversation unfolds gently, where music drifts instead of shouts, where beauty does not flash, but lingers. Even within Japan, the geisha is both familiar and foreign. She belongs to a time most no longer live in. And yet, she exists now, with tax documents, bank accounts, and the occasional rideshare app. She moves between two worlds. And because of that, she is often misunderstood. But she does not rush to explain herself. She has never needed to. Some modern geisha describe themselves as custodians, others as artists. A few prefer no label at all. They simply say, "This is my life." And indeed, it is a life, not a job, not a costume. It is made of repetition and rhythm, of beauty maintained through practice, of solitude and community. It is a profession, yes, but also a path, chosen, earned, and carried with pride. They are not relics, they are not stories, they are people. Women who rise before dawn to prepare their hair, who clean their instruments, who rehearse their dance steps in empty rooms before guests arrive. And when the lights dim, and the guests settle into the tatami, and the music begins, that is when the geisha shines. She does not need applause. She does not crave recognition. What she offers is smaller, older, and somehow more enduring. A moment, a gesture, a memory dot. The modern geisha lives not in defiance of time, but in partnership with it. She has found a way to let the past breathe through the present. And in doing so, she reminds us of something deeply comforting, that tradition, when tended gently, does not vanish. It adapts. It continues. There is a kind of silence that lingers after the music ends. It's not empty, but full. Full of memory, of presence, of something carefully tended and not yet forgotten. That is the silence the geisha leaves behind. When the lanterns are extinguished, when the teacups are empty, when the guests have gone and the tatami is bare, she does not rush to fill it. She lets it settle, and in that quiet her legacy lives. For centuries, the geisha has stood just slightly apart. Not quite a noblewoman, not quite a servant, not quite a performer in the public eye. She is instead something more elusive, an artisan of intimacy, a master of presence, a vessel for tradition. Her identity is stitched into silk, inked into fan folds, whispered into shamisen strings. She is not loud, but she is never forgotten. She has shaped fashion, the sway of her walk, the height of her sandals, the color of her kimono sleeves. Her influence reached beyond the hanamachi, drifting into the cities, the salons, even the cinema. Painters tried to capture her poise. Designers borrowed her silhouette. Tourists carried home postcards of her bowed head and powdered neck. But none of that captured the fullness of her world, because the true geisha is not visual. She is experiential, a presence you feel rather than watch. Her role has never been simple. She is a dancer who does not perform on a stage, a hostess who is not subservient, a companion without obligation. Her skill lies in nuance, the flick of a fan that signals a joke, the tilt of her head that invites conversation, the silence that deepens a room. She creates atmosphere not with spectacle but with grace. And that grace is hard-earned. Behind every flawless bow lies years of repetition. Behind each spontaneous laugh lies careful timing. The geisha's art is not improvisation, it is discipline. Studied, practiced, perfected. Not to impress, but to hold space. For beauty, for presence, for reverence. She preserves culture not by protecting it behind glass, but by embodying it. In every dance, she performs history. In every cup of tea she offers, she repeats a ritual older than memory. She does not just remember the past, she reanimates it, and in doing so, she reminds us that tradition is not a burden. It is a conversation between generations. And what does that conversation sound like? It's the creak of the okia floorboards at dawn, the clatter of hairpins arranged on a lacquered tray, the low hum of shamisen strings being tuned, the faint scent of incense curling through narrow hallways. It's the courtesan's voice calling down the corridor, the whispered chant of a tea lesson, the rustle of paper sliding in a CHG door. Small sounds passed down from one woman to the next. The geisha does not ask to be understood. She does not offer herself for easy summary. She is not a metaphor. She is not a fantasy. She is a real person, moving through a demanding world with elegance and intention. The word geisha means art person, but it also means discipline person, stillness person, listening person. She lives in the margins of things, and in those margins she creates wonder. Even now, in a world too quick for nuance, she endures. She chooses to. She dresses not to be admired, but to become a part of the setting. She entertains not to seduce, but to elevate the room. She listens more than she speaks. She smiles more with her eyes than her mouth. She knows that elegance is not style. It is patience made visible. It is easy to forget, in the rush of modern life, that such patience exists, that someone still practices walking slowly, that someone still writes poems by hand, that someone still studies 1,000 years of music to play a single note just right. The geisha reminds us of what happens when time is honored instead of managed, and perhaps that is her deepest offering. Not the fan dance, or the witty remark, or the perfect bow, but the reminder that beauty still lives in repetition, that grace still requires effort, that tradition is not stagnant, it is breathing through her, slowly and deliberately. So when you next imagine the geisha, perhaps not in makeup, not in kimono, not performing, but simply sitting with her shamisen, tea cooling, beside, her eyes lowered in thought, try not to see a relic. See a woman who has chosen a difficult path, a path paved in old songs, slow steps, soft gestures, a woman who learns every day how to turn presence into poetry. Her story is not over, it is ongoing. There are still apprentices waking before sunrise, still courtesan checking ledgers, still performances being booked, and tea being poured, and silk being folded, still laughter behind paper walls, still seasons marked by dances and poems and falling petals. The world around the geisha may change, but the core of her world remains intact. And as you drift now, carried by the stillness of this old tale, let yourself rest in the presence of that quiet discipline. Let the weight of tradition cradle you like a kimono sleeve in wind. The world is loud, but the geisha is soft. The world forgets, but she remembers. So let the lanterns dim. Let the music fade into memory. Let the tea cool. Let the paper door slide gently shut. Good night, listener. Rest easy in the hush of silk and shadow. The art person is still walking somewhere, quiet as ever. And now, so can you.